This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Can mushrooms be medicine? Or is the new multi-billion-pound industry a triumph of hype? Well, it's a story we've been investigating. Have a listen. I'm in my local health food store. Looking at the supplement shelf, I see something that wasn't there 6 months ago. A selection of mushroom powders. There's Reishi, turkey tail, and the hot supplement now of a mushroom that most of us had never heard of not that long ago, called lion's mane, supposedly good for your brain. Is it? Well, we're going to try and find out in this programme. These are medicinal mushrooms used by our ancestors for centuries. They're still used in traditional Chinese medicine and other holistic medical systems. They've interested me since I got seriously ill over a decade ago. I read what research there was and decided to add them to my diet. But then they weren't easy to buy. Now they're everywhere, though there's still little research on their effects on humans. Not that you'd know that if you Googled lion's mane or chaga or reishi or turkey tail. You'd think you'd struck medicinal gold because they're touted as potential cures for almost everything. So what's going on? Is it all marketing hype? How did they go from ancient wild food to a multi-billion-pound industry?
The real interest, the popularity of mushrooms right now is a great surprise to me. Mushrooms have always been seen by some people as having these somewhat supernatural powers. And so I think there's many reasons that we're attracted to them. And they are beautiful. These are beautiful organisms to look at.
This is Professor Nik Money, expert in fungal biology at Miami University in Ohio in the United States. In 2016, he published a review of all the scientific evidence of the effects of medicinal mushrooms.
There's fewer than a dozen mushrooms that are therapeutic stars, the medicinal mushrooms that are talked about most often. Reishi, which is a bracket fungus, and it's got this beautiful polished red surface. Shiitake, it's an unassuming brownish-coloured umbrella. Turkey tail is another one with little vivid stripes. Cordyceps, famous fungus that fruits from dead caterpillars. Chaga erupts from wounded birch trees. It splits and dries and it forms this charcoal lump. And then we'll go with one more, which is lion's mane. And it matures as a rounded wodge of these pure white spines that hang down. I tell my students that it looks like a frozen waterfall. Beautiful, beautiful fungus.
In your writings, you ask the question, are mushrooms medicinal? I mean, it's a simple question. So what was your conclusion?
My conclusion is that they're not, based upon the kind of evidence that we bring to bear when we look at prescription medicines. We expect them to actually work. That same logic does not apply to medicinal mushrooms because in most countries they're sold as foods. They're not subject to any of the same kind of regulations that we insist apply to prescription drugs. And so therefore we're totally at the mercy of the companies that are marketing these medicines. Lots and lots of studies from China have been published that support the effects of these mushrooms on the effect of cells that are grown in culture. There are experiments in which experimental mice and rats have been fed large quantities of powdered mushrooms, and the researchers record the effects of those treatments. But there's a huge philosophical gulf and a scientific gulf between those kinds of experiments and actually applying that to the level of Western medicine where we can trust that these drugs actually work. Right now, the evidence is almost completely lacking that these drugs have any proven effects upon human health or well-being.
The fungal kingdom is fascinating. It's neither plant nor animal. The mushroom part we see is only a tiny part. Their underground network of mycelium is both decomposing and absorbing nutrients from the world around it. But in spite of recent best-selling books such as Merlin Sheldrake's The Entangled Life and the multi-billion-pound market in supplements, Western pharmaceutical science hasn't yet seriously started to explore the potential of mushrooms as medicine, but that may be changing.
There are probably many, many compounds within mushrooms that have very powerful effects upon our physiology. But because we're not doing a lot of real science on studying the pharmacological properties of mushrooms and compounds within mushrooms, we're really not actually exploring this full range of possibilities. So I think that given that I often look at a mushroom in the woods and the fact that it's interacting with all of the nature around it, the insects and the plants and so forth, it must be producing a galaxy of what we call secondary metabolites that are interacting with the rest of nature. This is what we should be studying, and there are methods for looking at this now, powerful genetic methods for actually finding out what these mushrooms are actually producing. So there are beginning to be these early stages, I think, of some pretty serious medical inquiry into these products. And so that will, I think, prosper in the future, and that's what I'd love to see. And so, yeah, I think the future, actually, of mushroom medicinals is limitless, but we're just not there yet.
So, not there yet, says Nik Money. But what about nutritional punch? They've certainly got protein, several essential amino acids, and vitamin D, because, like us, they make vitamin D from sunshine. But for more detailed answers, I went to share a coffee with Dr Emily Leeming, scientific researcher at King's College London and a registered dietitian. On my way to meet you at this cafe, I've been looking into a few of independent shops. There are a lot of mushroom supplements now. And, lion's mane and reishi and all kinds of things. What's going on? And if you go online, I mean, my God, it's overwhelming.
So I think these mushrooms are very much having a moment right now. They're kind of labelled as kind of super brain drugs. So things that are going to potentially help with lessening anxiety, improving potentially depression. It's very much about these mind benefits that we're seeing. The labels on the claims are getting put out there.
What do you think of those claims?
I think that at the moment they seem to be quite overblown. We don't have as much evidence on humans at all. It's very limited. And while these studies are great for giving us a signal for research areas that we should be exploring in humans, those effects that we see in mice and cells don't always translate to human beings.
And is it worth eating mushrooms, for their nutrient benefits?
So I know not everyone's a fan of mushrooms, but they are really, really great for our health. They're a great source of fibre, and they're really high in beta-glucans, which is a type of complex carbohydrates that our gut bacteria love to feed on. We talk about them a lot in oats. They help to lower our blood cholesterol levels of our bad blood cholesterol. Their supposed benefit for your immune system is actually because of these beta-glucans feeding your gut microbiome and that relationship between your gut microbiome and your immune system working together.
Do we know anything about the effect of mushrooms on the microbiome?
So again, this is where we need a lot more research to understand specific foods and their impact on our gut bacteria. So we know broadly that kind of healthy eating patterns are really important, specifically a Mediterranean style of dietary pattern, which is kind of rich in nuts and seeds and legumes, fish, extra virgin olive oil. And so I very much would take mushrooms as being another key player in that. But what we don't know yet is what mushrooms specifically targeting in terms of our gut bacteria. We do know that mushrooms contain those beta-glucans, which our gut bacteria love to feed on. So there is likely a great benefit there, but it's all about having a variety of different things rather than focusing and zooming down on specifically mushrooms as being kind of the latest gut health hero.
One medicinal mushroom we're zooming down on is lion's mane. I'd seen it for the first time earlier this year at Organic North Wholesaling in Manchester. It stood out, ghostly white, the size of a cricket ball, a bit ethereal, with its covering of long white strands that give it its name. I'd only eaten lion's mane as a supplement, but for this programme I was keen to eat the real thing, but the best way. I asked Chef Vince Kelly for advice. He teaches doctors to cook as part of the culinary medicine group and is a lecturer in culinary arts at Westminster Kingsway College. He was there and I was in my kitchen, connected by Zoom. Vince, I have in front of me a lion's mane mushroom. What am I supposed to do with it?
They're a really, really nice mushroom. The greatest thing about them actually is the texture when you cook them. It reminds me a lot of monkfish. You can just slice them 1 to 2 centimetre widths, stir frying or pan frying them. You could air fry them as well.
So Vince, I've got olive oil, butter, garlic.
I just brush them off with a pastry brush or something rather than wash them or anything, because they take on the water so quick and you don't need to damage them. So very important that, you know, your pan is nice and hot, obviously, because you want to seal it and you want to maintain a bit of texture in the middle. But you almost like trying to cook the perfect piece of fish.
I'm putting the lion's mane in now.
If you had time, I would chop the thyme and then just toss that in, but go into the flavour of the butter and the oil.
At this minute, I'm just grinding in some salt.
Use minimal cooking time. They're so delicate as well, and they could lose their nutritional value if they're exposed to high heat for extended periods. So it's always best to just, quick frying is probably one of the better ones to do. Try not to overcook them, really. So they should be just nice crisp brown on each side. Maybe a little splash of lemon juice at the end might be quite nice.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to be genteel. I'm just going to eat straight out of the pan. They smell really good. Well, I'm sorry you're not here in the kitchen. They are good. They're not mushroomy at all, in that sense of if somebody served me this, I'd say that's good, but I wouldn't know it was a mushroom.
Yeah, that's the thing about them, all right. They're a very good alternative for vegans and stuff as well, from a texture point of view.
And you're right about the thyme. The thyme's nice. Wow. Chef Vince Kelly. I think lion's mane could make it big just on taste, but that's not the explanation for the multi-millions being invested in supplements and the rising public interest. That is about some evidence and big claims that it's good for our brains. I asked Professor Nik Money for his thoughts.
Lion's mane is a fascinating mushroom, and one for which there are some really interesting claims that it may have some very useful medicinal properties. And it's the mushroom that's got people probably most excited recently. The evidence is that extracts, so purified molecules, chemicals from the lion's mane mushroom, increase the growth of nerve cells in culture. So these are nerve cells that are growing in culture dishes, and you add these compounds and the nerve cells proliferate, they grow. Other experiments on rats and mice show that when they're fed powdered mushrooms, that we find that the levels of a compound called nerve growth factor increase in these mice. And nerve growth factor is this really important compound. It's referred to as a chemical messenger, and it helps maintain the health of the nervous system. That's the exciting stuff, and that's really as far as the science goes. Although there was a study from Japan more than 10 years ago now that showed that patients that were suffering from mild cognitive impairment showed improved test scores when they were fed powdered lion's mane for 15 or 16 weeks, and their test scores seemed to improve. So that's a useful piece of information, but this really isn't enough information for marketing mushrooms with proven curative powers. It's the Wild West when it comes to lion's mane, and the lion's mane's in coffee now. So yeah, it's the mushroom superstar right now, but the mushroom itself is a fascinating fungus that deserves a lot further scrutiny from this medicinal perspective.
Professor Nik Money. One of the few growers of lion's mane in the UK is Forest Fungi, set up 11 years ago by Scott Marshall. They grow and supply a range of specialist mushrooms for food in repurposed greenhouses tucked away behind the beach in Dawlish Warren in South Devon.
Forest Fungi was set up with the idea to grow gourmet mushrooms to a market that didn't quite know what gourmet mushrooms were. So we established with one grow room and the shop, and then, as you're about to see, we kind of expanded between then and now.
Gourmet mushrooms, but also medicinal mushrooms.
Absolutely, yeah. Started for medicinal reasons.
So when you got your diagnosis of testicular cancer, it was, what was the link to mushrooms?
I think it was firstly a link to nutrition. My partner Becca, she very much believes in nutrition. So she sort of looked at my diet and what I was eating, and one, was horrified at my diet and what I was eating, and two, believed there's things that I could do to improve my health. Shiitake came up as a good way with beneficial compounds to help to overcome the ill effects of chemotherapy. So that's where the interest started from. There really wasn't much information. So at that point, I was going to the local supermarket, buying what was available, and then eating 3 or 4 raw 3 or 4 times a week.
So you really feel that it helped you recover?
Yeah, I think physically, spiritually, getting in touch with food. I was very much a commercial sales manager prior to that. A huge part of the change in myself was to look at diet and what I was taking in generally as well. So I definitely developed an interest in cooking, an interest in ingredients, an interest in food from there. So yeah, it was life-changing, I would say. Yeah.
So what made you think, okay, I'm sick, I've found this out about shiitake. What made you think there was a market for that?
The fact that no one else was around, which I wasn't sure whether there was an opportunity or for good reason, particularly shiitake, essentially Chinese, I wouldn't say dominated the market, but that was certainly the only source, which obviously are imported. They obviously have to be preserved. We can only assume they're preserved with some gas and they're part dried. A 4-week journey is not great for a fresh product. So, and that process of how they imported them definitely affected the texture, the flavour quite negatively, certainly as far as the chefs that we were trying to sell to were concerned. The freshness and the strains we use are, next level. We managed to work with some Dutch growers, and they were probably a decade ahead of anybody else. Everything's done via climate control. We control air, light and humidity, and that's it. Yeah, we're literally reproducing how they would grow in the wild.
Okay, can we go in the first one? So this is shiitake, right? Ooh, it's quite foggy in there. Ooh, there's something kind of mysterious and secret about this. This is a long, low-ceilinged room, and these metal racks are laden with what look like logs, and out of those man-made logs are tiny mushrooms, and then they get bigger and bigger mushrooms. So if I snapped one off and ate it, can I do that?
You can, I'll cut it off.
Wow. Well, I have to say that's a different experience from the ones I've bought at a supermarket.
Completely, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's almost creamy, and I think that's the feedback we have from the chefs. As fresh as that is a premium ingredient.
When was it that you grasped that actually you'd put your finger on a growing bit of the market, this new interest in mushrooms as a medicinal compounds?
I think medicinal, probably 3 years ago, 4 years ago. A lot of people were coming with problems that they were having and asking for advice on, what's it best to do? How's it best to take this product? What can you tell me? So I think people are possibly online, social media, finding a lot more information available.
What's driving this, do you think? I mean, why aren't they getting help from professionals rather than coming into your shop?
I think they are, but I think it's down the conventional route. So, a lot of people will go through the prescribed treatments of chemo, and then, the side effects of chemo are so brutal that they then look for help with that, which, that isn't so obvious. I felt a lot worse after chemo than I did having had cancer. So I think that it's that post-treatment element that they're lacking. I think people feel so horrible after it. They're just desperate to some extent to try and make themselves feel better.
After a mushroom lunch in the Forest Fungi cafe, we drove to Scott's new high-tech growing site on a local farm, where he's hoping that the economies of scale will allow him to supply fresh mushrooms nationally.
Hello, my name's Dave. I am the head grower here at Forest Fungi.
Are you surprised at how well the business is doing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it constantly surprises us. Every time we put in something new, we think, this is going to take us 2 years to fill up, and within 6 months we filled it. It just seems to be endless at the moment.
You also, in this unit, you're growing lion's mane, although it's the end of the season now, isn't it?
Yes. Lion's mane, great big ball of a thing. So, interestingly, when we grow it, we have to sort of force it through a very small space. And doing that really helps to firm up that inside. Very, very quite dense if you get it right. If you really let it go, it will get to about the size of your head. Yes, becomes a little bit difficult to sell in that format, I have to say, because you end up with a sort of 2 kilo lion's mane.
Scott, I mean, what is the future of your business?
I mean, the future for us immediately is to expand the food operation. We're going to diversify on species, plus the shiitake market is quite buoyant, so we'll probably be growing triple the amount, double the amount of oysters that we're currently growing, and then start our first large commercial scale lion's mane grow. Beyond that, we're then going to start to supply the medicinal market. So we feel that probably within 12, 24 months, there will be some form of guideline or regulation that allows us as a grower to know that our product meets the required content in terms of the mushroom's benefits and compounds, and then also then how to process that. So then we could know that we're doing the best we can do with that product.
Scott Marshall of Forest Fungi in Devon. The interest in medicinal mushrooms intensified during the pandemic. In 2021, Grandview Research valued the global functional mushroom market at $26 billion and still growing. Emma Clifford is Associate Director of the Food and Drink Research Team at the consumer research organisation Mintel.
There is growing interest in the natural medicinal properties of ingredients as discovered and used by our ancestors, for example, in Chinese medicine and Ayurveda. Mintel's consumer research found that a third of adults are interested in food and drink with healthy ingredients based on ancient wisdom. And young people in particular are really engaged with this concept. It is very on trend. And this is opening up a lot of opportunities for brands. By using certain ingredients which consumers are aware have medicinal benefits based on ancient wisdom, it means they don't have to make explicit health claims, which are, they're heavily regulated. For example, many people already associate chamomile, lavender and ashwagandha with relaxation. This doesn't need to be spelled out on pack, which wouldn't be allowed anyway. Lots of people absolutely want there to be scientific proof for health claims on food and drink, because there still is a fair amount of scepticism, distrust and general confusion around functionality. However, I also think that for many consumers, the medicinal properties of certain ingredients based on natural and holistic ancient wisdom may be just as compelling, if not more so, than knowledge based on modern science and clinical trials. And I think many people, young people in particular, they're just really intrigued to give these ingredients a go.
Emma Clifford from Mintel. Those strict rules for making health claims on pack don't extend to the mind-boggling amount of information you'll find online. There are a few outright claims that these powders and tinctures will actually cure cancer or Alzheimer's, but they certainly stretch what evidence there is. I'm Googling medicinal mushroom supplements now, and all sorts of blogs are popping up. And the language around the processing the manufacturers use is also confusing, especially when it comes to the mushroom mixes that are now sprouting up. And the most popular of those mixes is mushroom coffee. It's been a long and interesting journey from ancient medicine to hip fashion drink, which takes us back to Kisawa, the cafe where I was talking to researcher and dietitian Dr Emily Leeming, where owner Chia Hiraoka was intrigued to brew us two of the mushroom coffees that we'd brought with us.
So should we try it? It looks and smells like very strong espresso, and we have huge cups of it. Adaptogenic coffee with lion's mane.
It does taste coffee-ish, but there is that kind of something earthy
behind it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not unpleasant, but I don't think I'd want to drink that very often.
No, I think I agree with you. I think I'd want my usual cappuccino with a bit of froth.
I wonder if you could make cappuccino with this. I don't know. Yeah.
Because I think what people are using these at the moment is to kind of swap out, can I have like a healthier version to not perhaps get that over-caffeinated effect. We do hear about people saying that they are having benefits from this. And I think a lot of it potentially is actually because that ritual of sitting down, having a nice cup of tea, a nice cup of coffee is very relaxing. Because we don't have that much research out there, it's quite hard for us to actually say very clearly, is it actually having an effect? And again, we don't know what an effect is because we haven't got the research to show it. So you might be drinking this coffee and thinking, okay, great, I actually feel really good afterwards. But is that actually from the lion's mane, or is it actually from the cup of Joe that you're having? I'd probably say it's the coffee.
You have that kind of slightly smug feeling, I'm having a coffee, but I am also doing myself good.
Exactly. And I think that placebo effect is potent.
It says Dual extracted lion's mane mushroom extract.
That sounds like a marketing tactic in my books.
Yeah.
So we're very much leaving it to individual companies to kind of decide what side of the line they want to be on. In terms of supplements, they're not nearly as regulated as pharmaceuticals. So, again, it's the Wild West. They can put pretty much whatever they want on there. These specific types of mushrooms, these nootropic mushrooms, are seen to be generally safe for now. And I think it's perhaps maybe falls into one of those groups where just because we don't have research on something doesn't mean that it might not potentially have a benefit, because we just don't know yet.
Well, I've brought you some of the mushrooms that I take, and I started taking them when I got seriously ill 11 years ago. I've tried to be intelligent and thoughtful about, what might help to keep me healthy and not going back into having cancer. But I don't know because of what you've just said. So it was like some sort of insurance policy?
I think when things are generally safe and you know that actually you're comfortable with being able to wanting to pay for something, then, try it. But try it in a way that you're being curious about it, and actually, is it helping you? Are you noticing a difference? And if you're not noticing a difference, then perhaps that's something you don't need to be spending your money on. So very much I feel like it's a choice for the individual, as long as it's safe.
What do we know about the difference between those mushrooms in the raw and this in the supplement form? Do we know that once you dry them, that they have the same qualities?
So if we talk about mushrooms as a whole as a powder, we've already breaking down that kind of food matrix structure by powdering things. So, we're kind of processing the mushroom. So it's probably likely to be less good for our health. However, these supplements are very much about distilling and intensifying into a supplement, so you get theoretically kind of more active components. So that's really the difference there.
Yesterday I talked to my oncologist, and he said, you're in danger of becoming a super responder. Whatever you're doing, you should carry on doing it. And I thought, oh God, well that's very expensive, because, I'm taking cordyceps and turkey tail and chaga and lion's mane, and it's an expensive way to keep well, and I have no idea if that's part of the reason why I am this super responder. It's difficult, isn't it?
It is difficult, and I think that's really where we do need more research on these things, because ultimately we all want to have tools that we can feel like we can have control over for our health.
When I first got cancer, one of the pieces of research that I thought was interesting was that in Japanese hospitals, mushroom supplements are used to help people deal with radiotherapy and chemotherapy. And there seems a good deal of evidence for that it does. Why don't we accept that evidence here?
There's many factors at play. I don't know if I could fully understand myself why we get certain funding go to certain things and not. I do think that we want to see enough of a big benefit from these, what we call them preclinical studies. And also the fact that we are in Western medicine, we are probably a little bit reserved about opening our minds to other alternative approaches.
And there's also perhaps here there is this kind of like medical treatment. It's like looking down a telescope. You don't want to look at the bigger picture.
We sometimes talk about it like a bunch of blind men going to look at an elephant, and each blind man is looking at a different part of the elephant and actually not realising that the other blind man just on the other leg is seeing something completely different. And actually we need to be looking at the whole picture, because our whole body is totally interconnected. And I think there is a lot of an element where we need to think about the pillars of health. So we need to think about nutrition, we need to think about stress levels, we need to think about sleep and movement as being the foundation to our health. So actually what we really want is a variety of all these different types of foods, because they've all got different bioactive components, they've all got different types of fibre, and actually that is what's helping our health in the best way possible.
Do you think this is a mushroom bubble? If I talk to you 2 or 3 years from now, it'll all have disappeared?
I think if we get some academic research going and we get some interesting outcomes from that, then I could see that we'll still be interested in still talking about mushrooms. I do think that in health and nutrition, we go through phases, we go through trends. So I think if we don't get that scientific research, I think it will be like the next hot thing that comes along.